Okay, welcome to class 7. Yeah, shadow work tonight. Are you ready for shadow work? What? A little louder. Yeah. Are you ready for shadow work?
Bring it on.
Yeah. Shadow work. Shadow work. Yeah. Oh, look, we've got a number of highly motivated type A people that are running almost an hour on a motorcycle down from Ubud to Canggu for class. Ask yourself this question: would you motorcycle an hour to get to class at 7 a.m.? I mean,
Hey, it's beautiful body.
yeah, well, that's true. It is Bali. Yeah, right. We had to make breakfast for the kids first. Okay, well, here we are, all of us again, for another episode of your life and your internal world. And greetings to everybody far and wide, and also those joining us asynchronistically from Europe, and anyone watching the videos later, welcome again. And let's so we're in the third session of the Jung. I haven't spoken enough about Jung's journey. I hope that you're reading his memories, dreams, and reflections, just to, if that's the first time or the first exposure you have to Jung, it would be great to. I find that book a great entry point into Jung's writing. Otherwise, they can become sometimes opaque or cumbersome. It's a little esoteric, and the time period he was writing in, sometimes his writing is more challenging. But Memory, Dreams, and Reflections is a nice, more easy way to get into Jung's thinking. I think his personal journey is compelling. I think Memories, Dreams, and Reflections from start to finish give you a sense of how the man is just a human being, has all kinds of faults and limitations. And what is heroic is his courage, his willingness to go to the places that are off limits for most of us. And I mean, if you look at his biography from the vantage point of having his entire career already executed, then you'll see what a massive contribution he was able to make. Volumes and volumes of theory. And how did that come about? It is basically his soul journey, all the milestones of the heroic journey that he survived and went through. So I think from that point of view, what I like about Jung is that he's just a human being. I mean, he's more accessible. He's not perfect. He's not a Buddha. He's not Christ. He's not so far removed from us. He's just a human being. He had struggles growing up. His father was impotent. His mother was not well and not available and not fulfilling of the maternal archetype. He therefore early in his life found solace or refuge in the interior world, into the interior landscape. And this early childhood experience sets him up for more receptivity and more willingness for the inner exploration, what Bob Thurman would call a psychonaut journey. Someone who is willing to go into the nether worlds. There is a moment in his biography where he attaches himself to Freud, becomes his senior pupil. Freud sees great promise in Jung. Jung is a very astute, very capable mentee. Those qualities are born of his overcompensation. And he wants to please Freud. He wants to become his heir apparent. And there's that moment on their passage voyage from Europe to America that's dictated in memories, dreams, and reflections that I also recount and return with the Elixir because it's so significant, a departure where the two are engaged in shadow work, essentially, in dream analysis on the deck of a ship. And each offer the other counsel by being the witness to the associative process of recollecting each other's dreams the night before. And there comes a moment where they're going back and forth, and it's Freud's turn, and he's freely associating, and he stops in his tracks, and he doesn't go any further. And if I'm not mistaken, the quote is something about, I would give up my seniority, or I would give up my competence, or I would give up my authority. That's what it is. If I go any further, I'll give up my authority. In other words, Freud had a moment of hesitation, of pause, of being vulnerable with his mentee, and stopped the transparency and the exchange. And in a way, that was it for Jung. That moment was it. That was the hairline fracture, the beginning of the end. Because what Jung saw there was that the person he admired was not willing to be vulnerable, and was not willing to be honest, and was not willing to have full transparency, and not willing to then therefore engage in full transparency and reciprocity. And what we know was that process of rupture between mentor and student was deeply, deeply painful because of the backlog and the backstory of never having a father and finally finding one. You can imagine that in Jung's unconscious, there is a deep yearning and a deep need for this archetypal figure to emerge, to constellate a kind of presence that would enable him to grow and develop. And having never found that, and then eventually finding Freud, it appeared that that could be possible. And don't get me wrong, there were many good years between them, many formative years. But then the rupture causes Jung to retreat to where he is familiar, to the interior. And through his writings, you can see this process over a number of years, what you and I would consider actually a very significant episode of Jung's life is a retreat into his unconscious that he himself calls the confrontation with the unconscious. It is described in different ways at different times and by different people, but it could be characterized as a descent into madness. A willing, which is really key, a willing descent into madness. Jung is opening to his unconscious. He's allowing his unconscious to become the new mentor. Instead of run from his unconscious or fear his unconscious, and this is one of the main features that distinguishes Freud from Jung, is that Freud was terrified of the unconscious. In fact, he had a combative attitude towards the unconscious. You had to be careful and vigilant of the unconscious because it could subsume you. It could drive you into at least conflict with society. And so you had to be hyper vigilant, watchful, ever watchful. and resourceful with the impulses that lay dormant in your psyche and hidden from plain sight. Jung's contribution vis-a-vis the unconscious is critical. His shift change towards the unconscious changes everything about his approach. It's not adversarial. It's like an ally. And Jung didn't necessarily seep into pop culture the way that Freud did. So even people that aren't into psychology or self-awareness know, even if they don't know it's Freud, they know some of Freud's ideas about the unconscious, about the instincts, about dreams. Jung, for some reason, gets marginalized, but his contribution is so amazing. The unconscious is a friend. It's going to reveal for us, for our benefit. It may disrupt. It still may be disruptive, but it's disruption in the service of a deeper mission. Whereas the mission for Freud was about the pleasure principle, gratification of the ego and the instinct, trying to find a socially acceptable way to gratify the urges and the instincts. Some sort of compromise between outer and inner is the best that you can hope for. Jung's approach is to see that what we are is heading towards greater wholeness, more expansive wholeness, that the ego terrain, the narrow range of what we call the ego, is situated like a bubble floating in a pond. And its mission is to expand so that it becomes more inclusive of the ocean it is situated in. And what facilitates that process is the unconscious. It sends up memories, it sends up emotions, it sends up symbols, and it's calling us for greater integration. And if we're not prepared and we don't speak that language, and we're still influenced by more of the adversarial, it can create a deeper conflict and a deeper division amongst ourselves, within ourselves. In fact, we can be terrified of what is inside of us. We can be more guarded, therefore more rigid, therefore more defended. So we're heading from ego into shadow in this class. And I wanted to just revisit ego for a second, because ego also gets a little bit of a bad rap, especially in spiritual circles. Somehow the methodologies of meditation or Buddhism are about destroying ego or collapsing ego, or seeing through ego or transcending ego, that somehow the ego is the bad guy. Are you familiar just with that notion? That may occupy a lot of spiritual circles, particularly New Age circles. Ego is not the problem. Ego is a necessity. What is ego? Ego is just the mediating factor between outer and inner, the mediating factor between the unconscious and the external world. You need an ego, you need a moderator, you need a portal in which outer and inner meet. The ego is not a problem. All of you actually have a personality that's distinct to you. The Dalai Lama has a personality. Geshe Tenzin Zopa has a personality. Monku Jitu has a personality. Priestess of Panuli-san, Jiro Ning has a personality. Even these high lamas have personalities. No problem. They're distinguishing, they distinguish us from each other. The problem is not the ego. The problem is the level of fixation and over-identification imbued in the ego. That the problem is if the ego is too narrow and the unconscious is sending us signals for expansion and we resist. The problem is that the ego may have been partly a micromanaging apparatus or adaptive strategy. And then when you hit midlife, something else is required of you. The world needs you in a different way. And you're stuck. You're stuck in the Shire. You are confined by ego. It's not the ego, it's the constriction. The constriction, maybe the Buddhist term for that would be grasping. So they have this word in Sanskrit, atmagraha, the soul or the self, or we could say the ego grasping. The grasping is the emphasis of the problem, not the ego. Do you follow? It's the grasping or the confinement or the identification or the rigidity or the arrest in development or the fixation, that energetic tight fist, this is me, and everything else to the exclusion. That's the problem. The ego is not the problem. You need an ego. In fact, you will go on a journey to expand ego. You will go into the netherworld. You will go into the labyrinth. You will leave temporarily ego behind. You will leave that narrow bit of real estate behind. And on your return journey, having faced trial and found treasure, where is it that you return, if not to the ego? But the return journey to the ego is a expansion of the ego. It makes it more flexible. It makes it more malleable. It introduces something new to it that creates more wholeness and more integration. The parameters shift. The boundaries shift. There is more inclusion and there's more flexibility going forward. So what we want is a more expanded ego that has flexibility. That flexibility is like all-wheel drive in a vehicle. It allows you to go to mountaintops. It allows you to descend into waters. It allows you to take on different weather conditions. So you'll hear in Buddhism this idea of selflessness, anatman, the truth of anatman, the truth of selflessness. There is no self. There is again a kind of problem that what you're aspiring for is the mountaintop vista in which there's no self or ego. Actually, selflessness is just a medicine for reification. It's the medicine for the grasping. It's a medicine for the confinement. It's a medicine to let go so that you can expand. It's not a medicine that obliterates the ego. And that's why I introduced this idea that the Dalai Lama has a perfectly functional ego. That's what we want. He's a giggling guy. He likes little robots. He likes building watches. He likes, he has idiosyncrasies that are particular to him. These are all part of his personality. No problem. The Dalai Lama is equally adept at going into some circumstance as a highly disciplined Vajrayana master as he is being playful with a public crowd. He has that dexterity, that flexibility. He's also open to feedback. Okay, there may be criticism, and there was recently in some scandal, which we won't go into other than to keep in mind that there are multiple perspectives on this scandal. What really happened there? But even there, even amidst in his 80 years old, after contributing so much to peace on the planet, he comes under fire and under scrutiny. How does he handle it? How does he handle the epic moment of possibly the biggest fallout in his career or in his legacy. The way that he handles that is a testament to his actual character and to his practice. And it means that the ego has been made serviceable, receptive, open, flexible. It can include criticism. It can include feedback. It can include hostilities and negativities. It can include even your enemy firing toxic poison at you. It can include that. It can incorporate that. So just that to clean up the last little bit of the last class as we come now into shadow. There's also an equal sort of misnomer to clarify about, around the shadow. What is the shadow? We should start there. The shadow, it has to do with all that we are that is outside of our awareness is the shadow. So if you want, you could swap in a word like unconscious. Sometimes the shadow gets also an equally bad rap, like the shadow is all the dangerous aspects of us, all the unwanted and dangerous aspects of us. Again, it's a little adversarial. It's true trauma is in the shadow. It's true all of our hostility is in the shadow. It's true some of the ugliness of what a human being, the darker sides of our human nature is in the shadow. That we have to be reasonable and realistic about. That we have to accept. But if we see the shadow as a demarcation of unconscious, then what else are we not conscious of besides our darkness? We are also not conscious of our divinity. I mean, how many of you feel divine? How many of you feel godlike? Maybe once in a while you have a little glimmer, but for example, confidence. If you don't have it, where is it? Courage. If you don't have it, where does it reside? You know, one of my podcasts with a Jungian and also Buddhist therapist, Rob Priest, it was so subtle, it almost just passed over me. And it's so obvious too, but it was the first time I actually heard someone say it. And of course, it had to be Rob Priest, who straddles the world of Tibetan Buddhism and Jung. But he said, your Buddha nature is in the shadow. What does that mean? The Buddha nature is in the shadow. Well, if shadow is too ominous and loaded a word, just say unconscious. The Buddha nature is unconscious. Does that make sense? What is Buddha nature? Buddha nature is the chakra is already complete. Do you feel that all the time? Do you feel that you're always capable all the time, that you're an infinite being with infinite possibilities? Do you feel that all the time? Well, where is that? Where does that reside? You know, when your ego gets triggered and the defenses come up and the demarcation, the landscape constricts, and this little bit of real estate is me and everything else is not me, that little bit of real estate, Probably what's not included in there is my infinite being, my infinite potential, my infinite resourcefulness. You can substitute any word that you like there. That's your godlike nature. That's your Buddha nature. Sometimes I call that soul plasticity. Soul plasticity is a word I coined to describe the corollary to neural plasticity, which is something that we've discovered in the last 20 years of neuroscience, that the brain, no matter what age, is always pliable. It gets its actual material density can change based on experience. So if you have if you string together a number of traumatic experiences, the actual wetware of your brain can transform, can constrict. You lose like gray matter, you lose neurons, you lose capacities, actual tangible, physical, material changes occur as a result of experiences, negative experiences repeated over time without any healing. That's the plasticity, that's neural plasticity. Well, if that's true, it's also true that if you create the causes and conditions for a healing environment, that your brain can recover, that your brain can expand, that new synapses can be forged, that the brain can actually grow. It's very well documented among meditators that the gray matter actually increases over an 8-week period of meditation. This is called neural plasticity. This is the corollary from the physical point of view, the material scientific point of view. For your own soul, your soul has that ability to constrict on itself like Gollum. If it's true that you can become contracted and contorted and distorted and limited and terrified and cornered and reactive and hypervigilant and assailed by toxic emotions, then it's also true that you can heal, you can grow, you can become more adept, you can become more flexible, you can become more courageous, you can become more compassionate, you can become more sensitive or resensitized to the plight of others. Why is that? Because the chakra is never broken. You have soul plasticity. You have Buddha nature. That too resides in the shadow. When you make a journey into the underworld based on willingness, as we've been discussing, you can never force someone to do it. It never works when you're forced. The journey into the labyrinth to face or to reclaim parts of ourselves that have become disenfranchised or unwanted. The journey into the labyrinth to face the Minotaur, that which we are most terrified to encounter. The treasure that it is guarding is the Buddha nature, is the vast horizon of infinite potentials that is situated behind or guarded by a terrifying demon that has cornered us, that is limiting us. So just try to think about it in terms of your own life, where you find yourself right now. Because one thing I can't do is I can't give a good lecture, but what I can offer you is the opportunity to make these principles as relevant to your life. And in a way, that's all that really matters to me. Like there are far better Jungian scholars that could be talking heads for you for a 2-hour lecture, and you should avail yourself of them. Far better Tibetan scholars, like go find Ian Baker. Far better astrologers, far better speakers in general about all of these topics. But for the purposes of the Crucible, is to take whatever we're learning and apply it directly to the stuck parts of our life, which I assume and I trust the reason that you're here is that you're following a particular journey and you've come for a particular school opportunity to invest a particular skill set so that you can meet the challenges head on, that willingness is already there. The part of the shadow, just as Jung describes, not only in his memoirs, but also in the Red Book. In fact, the Red Book is his consolidation of a number of very long journals called the Black Books. A whole volume of them were used to track and to engage in dialogue and to paint and to create poetry and to create right-left brain synthesis and to help him reflect on his inward journey. And then they were all, I might say, masterfully consolidated into what is now called the Red Book. I mean, a beautiful array of paintings and of calligraphy, high order presentation to match the exquisite journey that he was on over many years, where he was basically by night losing his mind, allowing himself to be digested by the unconscious whole, like the belly of a whale, willingly dying every night into the unknown, willingly surrendered into the chaos that some might deem a near psychosis. You know, the thing about psychosis, those of you that are clinicians, is what distinguishes a psychosis from a mystical experience is that ego obliteration is feared, and that there's a massive decompensation because there is no more orienting principle. You are awash in the vast ocean of the unconscious with no mediating factors available to you. And what that looks like from the outside for any of you is it can be jumbled speech, it can be chaotic mannerisms, it can be overwhelmed by emotion, it can be a complete unrelatability, a detachment from time and space, incongruency, and potential threat and danger as a result. Jung goes on such, goes into those waters. But he's able to bring in some amount of consciousness with him down there, like a flashlight into the labyrinth. And he does this dance between labyrinth and coming back to the world, labyrinth and coming back to the world. I mean, there was descriptions where he's able to maintain his daily life, including see patients. Imagine seeing a steady stream of patients and then off hour descending into darkness and being assailed by the unconscious. Imagine if you were his patient. Unbeknownst to you what Jung was doing at night under the cover of darkness, what he was encountering, what he was following. If you continue to read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, you see the progression into his unconscious of his escapades with his animus. First, he meets his guru, his soul guide, his spirit guide. Comes in a winged form, Philemon. And remember, he's never had a father he can rely on. Then Freud pulls his authority bullshit and they part. And so he's looking for that archetypal father figure to give him structure, guidance, to order his chaos, and to give him an orienting principle of masculinity in life. Well, he doesn't find it on the exterior, he finds it on the interior. For me to mix models or maps, this is the Buddha nature appearing in an archetypal form. It's the inner guru. The unconscious is your adversary. You just have to read it that way. It's true, he's assailed by nightmares. He has dreams. He has visions that are epic visions, including the premonition of World War I. I mean, he sees bloodshed and massive tsunamis and of blood and the world being tormented into chaos. What you nowadays might call, apocalyptic thinking, a doom and gloom. But it's his soul refining its sensitivity so that it can almost reach into the future and see the trajectory of the great dance of the cosmic cycle. The collapse is near. He senses it. And he has enough trust to allow it to unfold until it becomes clearer. He's staying in the pocket. He's staying in the crucible to interpret it. It's not clear what it is. Day after day, he has this repeated vision. Some of you have repeated visions. I've talked to you about your repeated dreams. At first, it's not clear what it means. You have to stay with it. The unconscious is speaking a language and you're not yet fluid. You're not yet fluent. But you stay with it. You try not to be so afraid of it. You say yes to it. If you say yes to it, maybe it appears the next night or a week later or a month later. You say yes to it. You build a mosaic. You don't know what the picture is yet. You put stone by stone, one next to the other. Then maybe there's a synchronicity. A synchronicity is an occurrence of seemingly a coincidence that actually has meaning. That's the actual definition from Jung. A coincidence with meaning, a coincidence of events in the external world that has meaning. Where does the meaning come from? You supply the meaning. The unconscious supplies the meaning. The diamond queen of intuition supplies the meaning. You string together a repeated dream with a few synchronicities, and you start to paint a picture of something that the unconscious wants you to understand, absorb, and integrate. Jung is getting closer and closer to the demise of his relative civilization. And with it, there is a kind of message that he is given and is turned over. And just like Noah, just like Jacob, God is speaking to him. His unconscious is speaking to him. The diamond queen of intuition is speaking to him and supplying him with a nearly impossible mission. Nearly impossible. Prepare. Prepare for the dance. Be flexible. Be ready to roll. Be ready to let go. Be ready to surrender. Be ready to rebuild. Be ready to create. So we're in the shadow. I wanted to say a couple things about shadow. Oh, somebody's locked out there. There's at least two principles that we should discuss about the shadow so that you can, and then I'll try to head towards shadow work for you, like give you some exercises. The first principle is the principle of opposition. We might call it the principle of duality. Okay. I'll say one, you say the other. Pain. What's its opposite?
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Yes. I say chaos. You say
Calm.
order. Yeah. I say power. You say
weakness,
vulnerability. I say light. You say
dark,
I say strength. You say
Weakness.
weakness. I say acceptance. You say rejection. Everything has an opposite. The world of dualities is created by these oppositional forces. Through childhood, we learn what is acceptable from us. The demarcating line between the accepted and the rejected happens in early childhood, and with a primitive brain structure that's already conducive to black and white thinking, the inevitable adaptation occurs where we orient towards one and reject the other. And depending on the story, depending on the cast of characters, depending on the transgenerational trauma, it's not clear what gets acceptable and what's acceptable and what's not. I mean, your story might be completely different from another person. But what is true is something remains conscious and serves as an orienting principle for love and acceptance. And something gets relegated to the unconscious. So, for example, for some people, you know, being a good boy, validation of being acceptable gets highlighted, and then all the unworthy bits go unconscious. For some people, peace. What's the opposite of peace?
War.
Or aggression. So being peaceful and accommodating goes to the surface, and what's its opposite? The aggression goes dormant. We've already sort of given vignettes in the last few weeks about, and maybe some of you, when I talked about overly compliant, being raised by a narcissist, some of you actually wrote me and really identified, thought that I was talking about you. Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise you're the one trying to do the self-care and the walk your way out of a trauma experience, and overly sensitive person. So all of those were prized or expected. And the vulnerability goes unconscious, or the rage goes unconscious, or the chaos goes unconscious, or whatever it is. So part of this assignment, you know, as we go through it, as I'm explaining it, is just to understand this principle of dichotomy and to see how your early environment may have privileged one, and then where does the other go? It goes dormant. You know, being sweet and nice. But what about being a pain in the ass and being angry? It's not allowed. It's in the unconscious. Well, what do you think happens when it's in the unconscious? The unconscious is defined as that which we're not aware of. Doesn't mean it's not active. One of Jung's observations is that the active forces that we're not aware of get projected out onto the world. So if your hostility was not permitted and you were very compliant, and that hostility is not well metabolized, but yet it's active in the unconscious, it may be that you see a lot of hostility in the world. And it may be, though I'm not sure quite how to describe the mechanisms other than by karma, maybe you attract a lot of people that create environments of hostility around you. And if you're not creating it, at the very least, you're not skillful or adaptive or flexible with it. And so even a minimal amount of it can trigger you or be disruptive for you. There's a couple of things to keep in mind, is this principle of dichotomy, of looking back in your environment and getting clear about what was expected, what was acceptable, what were the terms of the contract that we discussed, the soul contract that was written in blood but not in stone. What were some of those arrangements? What were some of those agreements? Where was the split made? What went into the basement or the labyrinth? What was used as a carrot to orient you? If you get clear about that, then you will understand a couple of things that will be important in your shadow work. The second thing to understand is the thermal dynamics of your own mind. What I mean by that is, to keep this split going, to keep this divide or this division active, that is like the unwanted and the rejected and the dangerous, and the ugly, to keep them at bay requires a fair to an excessive amount of energy to keep those separations. Like, it takes mental energy to maintain, to enact repression. You know, for example, I mean, just take one classic example. Maybe you're an ultra disciplined person. You like to get all your ducks in the row. You like to plan in advance. You like to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. You are doing that because you're oriented towards the success that was dangling like a carrot in your early family system, that if you're a good boy and you can do it all very quickly and all very skillfully, you'll get your carrot, you'll get your validation, you'll get mommy's, daddy's love or grandma's love or whatever it is. And it was on a reinforcement contingency that maybe wasn't as conditional as presented. And so you kept going on the rat wheel, getting ever better and ever more capable at channeling discipline so that you could put your eggs in a row or your ducks in a row. What is the opposite of discipline? Anybody?
Chaos.
Of discipline, like, okay, lethargy is close. I'm thinking of laziness. If you're ultra disciplined, then you probably learned that lazy would get you in trouble. You better have your room clean, because there may be consequences. Or at the very least, you won't get that validation that you need. Good boy, good girl, it's done. You know, that the expectations are met. Well, guess what? In this world, the way that we've constructed it, discipline is a very prized and celebrated and reinforced virtue. It's how it's what supposedly the American dream was built on. Hard work. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Anything is possible in America if you work hard for it. Okay? What's in the unconscious is the despised laziness, the judged laziness. In the verbiage of Schwartz, who invented the parts work, it's alienated. It's a part of us that's considered an other, that's excommunicated, the lazy one. And if you notice in day-to-day life, you might have a lot of contempt for people who are lazy. In other words, your consciousness is being oriented in such a way as to create this demarcation between discipline and laziness. You have oriented yourself around being the disciplined one. You have recruited a vast amount of energy to become the successful disciplined one. You have a lot of contempt, in other words, therefore, of the lazy one that gets projected on the outside, but also is reflective of when it is that you need to take a break. You might be confusing yourself that taking a break is a kind of laziness, and you don't allow yourself that break. Well, how sustainable is that? And so what happens is the weeks turn into the months, and the months turn into the years, and the years turn into the midlife crisis, where you're absolutely spent by orienting yourself in such a way that disregards your basic needs. And even though the world has celebrated you and you're now CEO, because those type A people are the ones that make it to that position, at what expense and at what cost? Then comes the midlife crisis, where you have to abandon the whole enterprise because it represents a complete split in your psyche. It is the result of a complete split in your psyche. And what is the expression? Everything comes home to roost. What expression is that?
That's an expression.
It's like karma. You can't run. Eventually it has a result. Eventually it takes a toll, the split. At the very least, you're rendered, just in terms of dynamics and energy, spent. you've become exhausted maintaining this split. So what is Jung suggesting? Well, Jung is suggesting that in dreams and through archetypal messages and through synchronicities, your unconscious is, and through symptoms, psychological symptoms, those ones that normally we go, oh, it's depression, it's anxiety, medicated. What if we were reinterpreting them that they're like calling out for help? Can you see me? I need some assistance here in aisle 3. What if the unconscious is asking us to reclaim, to stop the war of separation, to stop investing in the division, and to bring parts that have been excommunicated back home? And this is what Jung's contribution, another one of his contributions, is to suggest that the orienting principle for a human being, a successful human life, is the path of integration, or is what he called the path of individuation, which is the path of wholeness. That even more than trying to secure love, our soul wants to be whole. And this is why he liked, which we'll talk about next week, that he loved the iconography or the archetypal imagery of the mandala, because it represented the wholeness to which the entire endeavor of the human soul through countless lives is oriented. And what does the mandala? The mandala is a womb of integration. It is a weave of integration. It includes the masculine and its opposite, the feminine. It includes order and chaos. It is equally accepting of love and hate, of discipline and laziness. Everything has its place, you see, in the cosmic dance. Everything has a place. It's just depending on which way you look at it. Is there a place for anger and aggression? You have to say yes. You have to say yes. If you're cut off from your anger and aggression, it's like being in a terrain that you have no 4-wheel drive for. You're absolutely fucked. If you condemn your laziness and then you don't give yourself access to rest, you're absolutely fucked. Likewise, if you early on, because of a narcissistic parenting, have to be the meek one and the meager one and the identified patient and the one that's always sick and the one that it has no competency, because that serves to propagate and to uplift the parent, you're the broken one. That stasis is created around you, and your ego formation calcifies around that identity matrix. What is in the unconscious? What is in the unconscious is capable, assertive, powerful, and worthy. It's in the labyrinth. And maybe the anxiety that's happening to you at midlife. Maybe the anxiety is saying, hey, it's time for a change. You now have children. They need to see you as competent and as brave and as capable and as courageous and as fierce, including sometimes and when necessary being aggressive. Mama bear has fangs and talons, claws. So let's go through some of the ways to work. Is there any particular question at this point? before we move into that? Okay, in Vietnam here. Oh, Abby's in Vietnam. I see. 6 a.m. in Vietnam.
I had a question, Miles.
Yep.
You were talking about the sort of the death of the ego when somebody gets all the cash and prizes. And and then they wonder who they are or where what they're all about. It's that real. I think everyone goes through that, and certainly in a capitalist economy, we all go through that. And maybe that's the function of the Protestant work ethic as well. That sense of laziness, the sense of, industrialization, and so on and so forth. But it's so true when we have to go through the dark night of the soul, or the reintegration, if you will, as in a new way. Whether or not you lose your mobility, you have a life-threatening illness, or something else happens, you lose your job, somebody says something, whatever it is, even betrayals. Those are really reinvention points, and it's so true and so challenging. So I just really wanted to kind of embellish that a little bit more as to what you said, because it's very heartening.
Thanks, Keith. I think that's right on. I think, but what you're pointing to is that reframe that mythology offers us, that because most people, if they lose their job, they double down. If their normal defensive strategy or orienting agenda fails them, it's considered crisis. But what you're suggesting is, no, this is opportunity. And that's what Jung is suggesting. If what is in the unconscious is considered noxious, is considered dangerous, it has been excommunicated for a reason, what we're going to find is that eventually it's going to have a consequence. It's going to emerge as it's going to present itself. It's going to present itself one way or another, either by force of circumstance or by internal symptom. Right. It may come in repeated dreams. It may come in symptoms of depression or anxiety. There will be a choice point, which is, why I keep asking everybody on the call to think about where they are and to start looking at their dreams, start looking at their symptoms, start looking at the supposed crisis that they may fall themselves. Of course, all of us are sharing a larger cultural crisis, which we're trying to reframe as an opportunity for each of us to invest in something more meaningful. But in your personal trajectory, it's an opportunity to reclaim and reframe something that has been designated toxic in your unconscious, and to bring that disenfranchised part back into the family system.
Yeah.
So
to reclaim that.
Okay. So
I did want to ask you a question, Miles. Last week we talked about the dragon, and you made the dragon sort of like a Western dragon, which was kind of evil, or it sounded, it had a tone of being the bad dragon. We have to face our dragons. But on the Eastern side, the dragon is actually a good omen. This is the year of the dragon, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually a good omen. But it's very interesting that it's both. And of course, there's that archetype and that, that element of energy, which is to the point that you're making, which is, it has the bad, also has the good.
Yeah. Well, just think, from one vantage point, all of us have a fear that we don't want to look at. Okay, and then it's only by the force of the invitation of the mythological adventure that we say yes. But from the vantage point of just starting out on the journey, yes, it is a terrifying dragon. Even if the mythology is that the terrifying dragon is actually guarding a treasure and that it's a nice dragon, it's there to help you. Doesn't matter. If you're at that level, then you haven't really, you're not in the real world yet. You're not in the labyrinth yet, because the labyrinth, there is something in each of us that nearly destroys us,
Mm.
makes us utterly, utterly feel that we're incapable to face. I mean, this is, I think collectively, we've got a lot of dragons. I mean, some of these things, when you start to aggregate them together, they feel insurmountable. You have economic collapse, ecological devastation, systems, institutions that are corrupt. You have the whole gamut of doomsday prophecy. That's a dragon. That's a dragon. Yes, we have to mythologize it, but if you catch yourself on any one moment, its nature is to make you shit your pants
Mhm.
and feel like you're in, you're too small.
And it was there in the 60s. It's just more intense now, and much more intense. You know, when I was in the age of Aquarius, living on my hippie commune, I have to tell you, you know, it was a hell of a stretch looking at getting out of Vietnam and dealing with all that crap. You know, never mind Kent State and all the other shit that came up. So, you know, it's been around a long time, and here we are. It's even more intense, if not worse, to your point.
Okay, where was I?
Mahar has his hand up.
Okay, somebody else before I finish off here? Yeah.
I might ask.
Hold on a second. I've got one in the in here in Bali, and I'll repeat the question when it comes through.
There
There-
are people that end up in a continuously state of being in disconnecting, seeing things, fears for the rest of their lives that are not, and not able anymore to put all the fragmented pieces together and end up being alone for the rest of their lives. Can you share? I'm a little bit struggling with where are these people in what you just shared? Like you said, Jung is still able to, in the daytime,
Yeah.
get all these things together, get himself together,
Yeah.
sit with the patient, does the groceries,
Yeah.
cleans his house, etc.
Yeah. So it's Lanaka, right? Lanaka?
But some people really get lost.
Yeah. So she's asking, there are people that are so fragmented and so assailed that they become so dissociated and so fragmented that they're not able to create the integration in order to function in society or function in their families. Yeah, that's true. Yes. I mean, we see them all the time. A lot of you guys are therapists and trauma therapists and healers of some sort, and you inevitably will see people in all walks of life, in all dispositions, in all cultures that are so thoroughly, overcome by trauma that it seems or it appears that it's nearly impossible for them to complete this integration. And I mean, I don't know if you're asking this specifically, but it's a kind of prognostic question for me sometimes, holding the truth of Buddha nature, holding the truth that the chatra is always complete in your heart, that given the right causes and conditions, no soul is permanently broken. The chatra is never broken. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the people that we work with, whether we're clinicians or just family members or colleagues or fellow members of a society. I'm not saying I can do this personally. I'll say what maybe a Geshe Tenzin Zopa level person might say, and then I'll give you my personal. But we owe it to see people that they can never fully be broken, that that's not the nature, that it's only a temporary situation. If you see things from the soul perspective, that there's beginningless time and endless future, infinite possibilities. This circumstance is only temporary. These stains or karmic bundles, imprints, these casualties are just temporary. Now, that temporary may actually be a lifelong. It may be, the prognosis may not be so great in one life. There may be such damage, let's say. But every time I get convinced of that, every time I feel that in my bones, like, oh, this person, there's so little we can do for this person. You know, we can try to make them a little more comfortable, but are they really going to achieve? Are they really capable of achieving the full heroic arc, or are they a casualty of war? Yeah, that's kind of what you're asking, you know. And so, you know, the harsh thing from my limited experience is, yes, I fall into that once in a while where my assessment is like, you know, and I'll be frank with you, has less to do with really traumatized people, more to do with personality disordered people. Like, there are some narcissistic borderline people that I feel they feel to me to be beyond reform, if you will, or healing or transformation, but I've had enough conversations with conversations with Joe during supervision, conversations with Geshe Tenzin Zopa, and conversations with people who are doing the new neuroscience, and they're all convinced. I've had conversations with Jeffrey Rubin about psychotic patients, the prognosis of really deeply psychotic patients, prognosis of severely autistic kids. And they all are convinced that you can't close the door. You can't fully close the door. Now, that doesn't deny that some cases are more rigid and there's less time frame. And, you know, it doesn't mean that the prognosis isn't thoroughly challenging in these situations. But, you know, so I'm trying to be honest with you. Like, there are cases where I feel more despairing of the hope that this person can make a full recovery or a full transformation in one lifetime. So that's my honest thing. There are cases. That's what it feels like to me. But then there are these other perspectives that are reminders that what's the most important foot to lead with when you're sharing space in the matrix with these people is always to remember the long trajectory and the long cycle. And if it is really true that there's infinite life, then there is no demarcation where the prognosis ends and the chapter finishes and it's a done deal. That with the broadest perspective of infinite life, whatever positive contribution that you can make, and you can never heal someone. You're not the catalyst for their healing. What you are is the implementer of either the conditions for their healing, but not the cause of their healing. They can karmically create the causes for their own healing. You can only create the conditions, but those conditions are so important. So important. So from the infinite life paradigm and the paradigm of the chakras never broken, you're not limited by time and space. And so it's always incumbent on you as a bodhisattva to put the best energy into the situation possible. And maybe you only incrementally shift the dial in one frame of their lifetime, but you have to expand that notion. It's infinite. So this is where I think people like Geshe Tenzin Zopa never lose hope. They never lose hope. Never lose hope. They're always working for the benefit of living beings. They always think that what they contribute has meaning and value. They don't see it in such a narrow time frame. They're not rendered hopeless by the prognosis of one lifetime. Like if there's a severe brain injury, you know, even the neuroscience and the neuroplasticity that claim that everything can be rewired, even they have to agree some brains will have more capacity and less for others. So I think more to the point is depending on what frame of reference you look at these problems within, and then keep your orientation towards aligning with the bigger scope and what positive contribution you can make. I think that helps them the most. And ultimately, I think it helps us the most. because it's the most optimistic. It's the one that is the most resistant to caregiver burnout. It's the one that is most resilient. And I think that is the best medicine for any situation. That's and I'm not saying I can do that. I'm not saying I'm capable of doing that, but just hearing myself, it's sort of the best advice that I've heard. It's the one that is as realistic about who is in front of you and what have they survived. But it's holding that truth within the biggest, most generous perspective of human nature and Buddha nature. There was one more online, and then I got to really finish for tonight. Go ahead. Who was it? Was it Arturo? Who was it?
Miles, I wanted to answer your question, and
Oh, yeah.
It's a little bit hard to describe this, but when you start this journey, and especially when you start deepening your practice and in Buddhism, there's this voice that either creates or appears in your journey. And my question is, this voice, the one that tries to help you, tries to tell you to maybe believe in yourself more, or that maybe you're going towards the right direction, could also be tricky. And if you haven't trusted yourself for a long time, you're like, is this voice mine? Can I trust it, or is it coming from somewhere else? Especially if you are practicing, let's say, mysticism in your journey. So I guess my question is, my own answer to it was, I need to have a mentor. I need someone who's been on this path, and they can help me differentiate. This is the ego talking. My ego is getting bigger. I can't trust this anymore. Or if I want to go back maybe to your last week lecture, I would say, I need to sit with this. I need to start listening to this voice and see what happens. So I'm curious to what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, my part of my answer is also a segue. So excuse me to link your question to what I want to say about the shadow work. You're asking a very similar question that has been a thread throughout the entire course, is how do we know? And by now it should be clear that there is no way to really know for sure, because if it was, it wouldn't be a risk. And so you have to be willing to be wrong. Okay. And that eliminates nearly everyone from the heroic path. Do you follow?
Yes.
If you're not willing to be wrong, you cannot embark. You don't even take the first step to cross the threshold. If you're averse to being wrong in order to discover, you're not on the hero path. That being said, yes, part of the heroic path includes finding a mentor that has already been through the journey and can help you learn how to discern more qualitatively, more subjectively, to be more clear about your choices. But if the motivation is so that I can avoid stepping on a landmine, just stay in the Shire. You're not ready for this. If you're ready to blow off a limb or two in order to discover who you really are, by all means, everything that you land on can be transformed into a deeper learning opportunity. And there's no other way. There's no other way. I mean, you look at everybody who is a success in life, and you only see the snapshot of them claiming victory, like a Michael Jordan or whatever. You never see the backstory of the struggle that almost killed them. That, in other words, they had to die in order to get there. They didn't know. Even Michael Jordan had Julius Erving and Larry Bird and Magic Johnson to teach him, even though they had mentors about how to work hard. He becomes completely self-actualized because he transcends even the Julius Ervings and the Magic Johnson. He goes beyond. At some point, even with the mentor, you go into the unknown. You do something absolutely extraordinarily unique to you. And you have to be willing to fail. You have to. You have to be willing to get it wrong. And that's what It's baked into the process. That being said, yes, I mean, mentorship, people that have fellowship, people that have already done 2 or 3 rounds of this, people that have grown, you know, more wise as a result of their troubles. Yes, they can help you learn how to discern which voice is which voice. And here's one of the clues. And it actually ends up being the foundation for the shadow work, which got now 8 minutes to complete, which is not going to work. I'll have to push it off till next week. But when entering into shadow work, your state of mind is the ultimate precondition. And what I mean by that is the band range of consciousness that you bring to the problem. It's a little bit like that Einstein quote, like, you can't solve a problem with the mindset that created it. You can't solve a problem with the mindset state that created it. Okay, so if you're in a narrow, constricted, fear-based, loss of perspective state of mind, you can't do shadow work. If you're triggered, assailed by powerful emotions, drowning in overwhelm, or shut off and disconnected, that's not the time for shadow work. Shadow work is impossible at that moment. Okay, and so why am I saying that in relation to your question is, how do I know? Knowing is contingent on the mindset. If you're really fear-based and you're like, am I going to get it right? Am I going to get it wrong? Everything is barreling down on me. I'm at a decision tree and I've got to know. One of my intuitions is telling me to go 1 foot forward. The other one's telling me to run the fuck off. It's going to be much harder, much more difficult, much more opaque. Your number one mission there is not to decide. Your number one mission is to co-regulate and to come back online and to regain your senses and to get calm again and to find safety again and to find a network again, a refuge again. That's your number one thing. Can you do that? Can you do that? If you don't know how to do that, that's the first step in shadow work. Don't try to understand. Don't try to heal. Don't try to process. Don't try to do anything transformative. Your number one objective is to find safety. Don't try to correct what are you going to do with these people? Is it your past? Is it your present? Is this indicative of your shadow? Is it part of your karmic habituation? Is it the right foot forward? Is it the wrong foot forward? Was it your best look? Don't worry about any of that. Your number one thing is to reclaim what some people call wise mind, which means find a partner, have them help you co-regulate, discharge all that negativity and hostility and whatever, that fear, shame, let it come out, let the circuit close itself, gather yourself. It may take a day, it may take a week, it may take a month. Then you do the post-mortem. Okay, so I hope that's enough for now about your question. Try to look at the state of mind, because it does tie to what you were saying about, like, the state of mind is what helps you discern the fear voice and the fear channel from something much deeper inside of you. And what I'm saying is, even the deeper one, it's not always that clear, but you could, from a relative point of view, tell the difference in vibration or frequency between the fear channel and something that's more calm. If you can do that, you have a better chance. Better chance of what? Better chance of hearing a message. You still have to take the risk with the message, but what's it trying to tell you? Your best interpretive condition is calm clarity and perhaps co-regulation, being with other people that have your best interest at heart. Okay, so for the shadow work, just so I can plant some seeds and we'll pick it up at the beginning of next week. Shadow work is like this mysterious pop culture word now. It's like all the buzz in Ubud and like California. Ooh, we're doing shadow work, and there's like tinctures of essence and crystals and I don't know what else. Okay. Like magical performances of moving energy and like sweeping it away into an invisible bucket. Charging large sums of money while you do it. Then you go and look in that bucket. Okay. There are a couple variety of shadow work. Okay. One variety is just to analyze your triggers. When do you do that? Not while you're being triggered. After you've come back online and has wise mind and deeper perspective and all your cognitive faculties, and maybe with a partner, maybe with somebody who can be your ally, you do the postmortem. Postmortem means the autopsy. The autopsy means you revisit triggers. What is shadow? The shadow is the unconscious. What are triggers? They're the symptoms at the surface. They're just the waves. They're alerting you to something is active underneath. What's being activated? It's not always that clear, but most commonly it's never, it's like 99% has to do with something else. There's just one little bit of data in real time that's triggered you, and the rest has to do with some unresolved, unprocessed, implicit memory from the past. So part of one variety of shadow work is to create the conditions and the conducive conditions for a post-mortem on some of your triggers, and that trigger point becomes the doorway into the labyrinth. So I don't know what it is. Someone says something unkind. I don't know. Someone pulls the rug from underneath you. Somebody doesn't show up. Somebody says something and then does another. I don't know what it is for you, but I do know that you understand when I say trigger, it means that it activates you. It either makes you retreat, or it makes you angry, or it makes you question yourself, or it throws you for a tailspin. Something inside of you gets stirred. And then probably what happens is that you try to resolve it in real time. You try to correct it in real time in the environment by shifting the furniture in the room, sending off an email, or, you know, running away, being passive aggressive. Who knows? The point, though, of the shadow work is to do the labyrinth, go into the labyrinth of exploration and see how that trigger is tied to a bundle or matrix of associations, which Jung called complexes. These are archetypal, sometimes transgenerational complexes. They're filled with meaning. The person that doesn't show up, that makes you feel frustrated and you become animated, and people are looking at you like, why did that upset you so much? And you say, well, it's because of them, what they did, and you're pointing fingers and you're getting hostile. You're missing the deeper implication, which is somebody really significant, possibly repeatedly, didn't show up for you. And this is now a vulnerability. And because you must always have strength, the vulnerability has been excommunicated and is outcasted. And this is why I spent so much time at the top of the class talking about the dichotomies or the dualities, because what's on the surface is only half the truth. What we're doing by going through the doorway of the trigger is going for an excavation to find the disenfranchised, split off aspect of our personality and giving them the opposite message, which is something like, you have a place here. I'm interested in you. Come home. Come home to what? Come home to consciousness. There's a place for you in the family. Things have changed. The contract has been rewritten. It may be vulnerability for you. But as Keith mentioned last week, maybe some of us that dichotomy is inverse, and actually vulnerability is more familiar for us. And what about ferocity? Power. Well, you go looking for that aspect. How do you go looking for that aspect? The unconscious has a gatekeeper. It's called a trigger. It's like, here we are. Something is here. Come look at me. Come pay attention to me. I need you to really see this deeper picture. I need you to see me. I'm still in the oven. I'm still baking. I'm not fully ripe yet. I haven't come to full fruition. You haven't understood me fully. You haven't digested me fully. You haven't metabolized me fully. You haven't included me at the round table. You haven't given me a seat in the mandala. We talked about the dichotomy, and we also talked about the energy that's invested in keeping separation, which is projected out in the world of political division right now. We're all about political divisions and taking sides, and there's a tremendous force of energy that's keeping us divided, which I believe has two possible outcomes. It will actually contribute to a war, and potentially some astrologers saying, what's it called, when states break apart, succession. It can go that way, and it has already in the pandemic. I've already asked you how many of you felt that that politics contributed to fragmentation between partners you would never imagine would be split apart, or family members that you would never imagine be split apart. Or it just gets exhausted. It just gets exhausted, and then what happens is that it tanks in society the way that it does individually into a massive depression where there's no more energy. It's like the oxygen in the balloon just completely dissipates. People become like zombies, disenfranchised, zombies, disconnected, playing on their video games, assuming the avatar, leaving the world in some dissociated state because it's no longer tenable, completely hopeless that you want to move to Mars in whatever metaphoric way that makes sense to you. And you're seeing that too, by the way. Opting out, gone, people that are gone. So that energy needs to be transformed. That energy in our society needs to be transformed. And that energy inside of us needs to be transformed. Yes, we recognize a problem. Yes, we recognize distinction. How do we bring people together? How do we create a place for laziness and discipline to coexist? Because there is a time for both. There is a time for assertiveness, and there's a time for receptivity. There's a time for, action, and there's a time for acceptance. There's a time for order, but there is actually a time for chaos. Chaos is actually so important because that's the demarcating bardo in which new creativity is born. You can't form something new on top of the foundation of something that's pre-existing and fully functional. You have to it has to give way for ingenuity and entrepreneurship to create something new. So there is a time for chaos. Those of you that said, "Oh my God, my hands have been chopped from the riverboat and I'm in free fall," you're in chaos. Jung embraced it. He survived. Not only did he survive, he had mystical experiences as a result. You're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. If you're listening to this, we're being guided. We have Geshe Tenzin Zopas and God knows how many spirit guides. We're going to be fine. But we have to risk. We have to risk going into the labyrinth and taking several wrong turns and probably surviving a few desperate nights where we're like a Jonah in the belly of a whale. I'll go through the list and we'll pick up the shadow work next week. The number one thing is the working from a calm state of mind, from a wise mind with your triggers. The other one is dreams. Okay, the other place to do shadow work is dreams, dream analysis. And then the third one is not often discussed, but it is orienting yourself towards a monumental task. And you think to yourself, well, what do you mean? I think taking on a project that feels impossible is a kind of shadow work, because what it will do is all your bugaboos will be revealed. But also remember that what else lies in the shadow? What else lies in the shadow? Does anyone remember? Yeah, your divinity. Yeah, your divinity. How will you actualize your divinity? You orient yourself towards a project that is absolutely impossible. You face your demons. You win your treasures. You become an exceptional human being only because you took on a task that was absolutely impossible. Even if, and then you sit like Geshe Tenzin Zopa did at Mount Batukaru and tell us, even if they don't complete the chatra, it's okay. I'm okay. Because I oriented myself to the highest bar and the highest virtue possible. Anybody here that's taken the Bodhisattva vows, do you really think that you can maintain it? Do you really think that you can maintain it? And especially, do you think you can maintain it in one single lifetime? No. The purpose of taking the Bodhisattva vow is that you're oriented to the highest virtue possible so that you make your life absolutely critically meaningful. And even if you fail, which you will do on an everyday basis, you still get more out of your life than being someone who's too reluctant and resistant to take on such a task and that never grows as a result. Okay, we'll talk more about that next week. There's no time for a closing meditation, but we did do 38 minutes, so please don't send me email complaints. Okay, send me email complaints and I'll take it my shadow work. My parents firing on criticisms and complaints and how poorly I've done.
You're priceless.
Okay,
Marlo.
thus
priceless.
concludes another
Thanks for
session.
Thanks for the laughter at the end.
Welcome. See you next week. Time is ticking.
Have a great week.
Bye.
One more session in Jung.
Bye, everybody. Take
Bye.
good care.
Good one. Bye.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Amazing.